And we're back. I'm so excited to welcome Marissa from Blue Cloud to moderate a discussion with a couple of highly accomplished data pros who will talk you through the do's and don'ts of cloud migrations as experienced across GoDaddy, Netflix, and FINRA. Welcome, Marissa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marissa Miosi. I am a director of Blue Cloud, a cloud-only data and digital transformation company. I am based in Buffalo, New York, and I really focus on cloud sales and managing key client relationships, partnerships such as ThoughtSpot, Snowflake, and really manage a lot of our Fortune 500 customers. I help our clients to achieve their data requirements and business goals by managing really all phases of cloud migrations, and I'm super excited to be part of this bigger conversation today. So I'm going to hand it over to Michelle, let her introduce herself, and then we'll jump over to Ivan.
Thanks, Marissa. So I'm Michelle Ufford. I am a data person through and through. So I was at GoDaddy for 9 years, and I did what feels like a little bit of everything that you can do with data. And then I went to Netflix, where I led the big data tools team there, and I was focused on innovation to improve the overall usability of our data platform. And now I am a CEO and co-founder of Notable, which is building out a collaborative enterprise-grade Jupyter Notebook experience.
My name is Ivan Black. I work at FINRA, which is, for those who may not know, is a financial regulator whose mission is investor protection and market integrity. And personally, I've been focused for my career on providing platforms to our data scientists and to our analysts, particularly in the big data space focused around SQL access, machine learning, and AI.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So I think we've all kind of seen the benefits of cloud, and we know and understand why the cloud trend has been so rampant over the last couple of years. But a lot of people are hesitant to start the journey, or in some cases don't even know where to start the journey. I'd love to hear about both of your cloud migration experiences and kind of why you decided to move to the cloud originally in the first place.
I primarily focused on data. So my cloud migrations were all data related. And what really drove us to the cloud was the economies of scale that it provides to us, right? And the overall flexibility that we would have compared to our on-prem infrastructure. And so that was really like the motivation for us. I've both been a part of several migrations, and then when I started at Netflix, they had already migrated to the cloud, so they were already in AWS, and so I got to see both, the actual migration experience itself, as well as what does a mature cloud environment look like.
Yeah, and at FINRA, we obviously have a fairly sizable amount of data, and historically, up until we moved into the cloud, that was all in in-house data centers, and we really looked at that and realized that. While the platforms were working for us reasonably well at the time, we could see long-term that they weren't going to scale to the needs that we were going to have. And we realized that moving into the cloud gave us an opportunity to redesign the way that we worked, bring in data, manage that data, analyze that data, and then share that data. And we really thought moving to the cloud would give us a significant advantage in terms of scale and ultimately in terms of cost as well.
Okay, great. So I think we've kind of touched on benefits of moving to the cloud, what kind of prompted both of you within your experiences to take that step. What about key challenges associated with cloud migrations, or maybe lessons learned along the way, or tips or tricks you can share with our audience?
Oh gosh, where to start? I think that the cloud migration is overall a very worthwhile endeavor, but there are a lot of challenges that do come along with it. And I think some of those challenges you experience very early into the project, which is just understanding the real scope of what it is that you're trying to do and get everybody on the same page. And so I think one of the things that I've learned is that you cannot do enough advanced prep. You cannot do over communication of what it is that you're doing. And so one of the very first things that you need to do is get to the cloud, right? Get your proof of concept out there, get it working. And then you need to stop. Like, don't do anything else, don't migrate anything. And now that you have this real solid understanding of what the cloud is going to look like in your environment, now you need to really take the time to plan out a thoughtful migration strategy and data management strategy before you get too far in. Because it's always easy for us to say, okay, we're gonna come back to that once we get to that initial project completion. And yet it is so much more painful and cost prohibitive for you to do that after the fact versus if you just took that time up front.
Yeah, and there are other challenges too. I mean, obviously, Michelle's point is spot on. We had challenges, I would say, also in terms of sort of the organizational structure, particularly in the technology. Moving to the cloud sort of from an on-prem data center really changes the way you think about building applications, maintaining applications, deploying them. The entire life cycle changes. And there was a lot of effort that we needed to put in upfront in terms of training our existing staff to give them opportunities to grow into the roles that would become more prominent once we had moved into the cloud. Additionally, the pace of change in a cloud environment is much, much higher than it ever was, at least for me, on an on-prem site. And being, again, sort of building that training pipeline, building sort of that let's look at those new things now rather than wait for them to be forced on us later. Sort of changing that mentality really pays a lot of dividends that we see now. Really, the willingness to take risks with technology, I think, has increased as we've moved into the cloud, because we realize we can bring in a technology, give it a try, see if it works for us. And if it does, great. And if it doesn't pan out, that's okay. There's always some other technology coming out that we can incorporate into our cloud infrastructure. So that sort of design that fosters innovation, fosters flexibility, has really been almost an unexpected benefit of being into the cloud.
And just to add on to that around the training piece, we ran into some challenges with that, where early in the whole process, we decided we were going to train all of our engineers on the new cloud technologies. And so we went through that process, and then there was this period of time where they really weren't using the new technologies because we were in the middle of migration. And so once it was time for us to actually have them start using it, well, first of all, they had forgotten everything they'd learned. And then secondly, the things that they had learned were so generic, they were not necessarily applicable to our environment. And so there was this retraining that had to take place. And what we found would be more effective is if you took a handful of technology champions and had them go through that early training, so that when you do your subsequent training, it is much more focused on the specifics of your environment and what it is that you've actually decided that you're going to be doing as part of your migration and your cloud strategy.
Thanks, guys. So, Michelle, and I think we touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about the human cost involved in cloud migration.
Well, sure. The human cost, human cost is felt in so many different ways, right? I think one of the human cost is just on the actual migration effort itself. And there's a lot of things that, that we think we want to get off of these systems so that we can get them to the cloud and get all of these great cost savings. And then when you really take a step back, you realize that the effort to migrate those are not necessarily worth the cost savings. And so this is where I was mentioning, you really want to take time to really think through things at a deeper, more thoughtful level. And that means going beyond like the superficial metrics. And so one of the things that we ran into was that there were a whole bunch of tables out there and processes that were running against those tables and reports that were then going against those tables. And so we could see that these were running on a recurring basis. And so we thought we needed to migrate these. And what we found subsequently was that if you go far enough down the road, you realize that there's no person at the end of that really cares about that report, or they might be using it, but it's already in the process of being deprecated to be replaced with something else. And so if we had taken the time to really reach out to our end users and let them know, here's what we're doing, giving them advance notice, and then really kind of try this scream test approach, right? And so I don't know if you've done the scream test, right? But the scream test is where you really start to go through your infrastructure and you take down pieces and you test and say, do we really need this? Because we don't have the visibility we need. And you do that through communicating with your end users in advance so that they don't wonder what's going on when things start breaking, right? They know that you're testing out this. If you do that, the amount of effort that or the amount of things that you can migrate could be dramatically reduced, or it was the case in our environment. The other kind of human cost here is really around things like the data storage itself, and how do we find data, and how do we think through these things. The actual data discovery piece is so painful in most companies, and we don't really have a good way of quantifying how we feel that cost, right? And so when it comes time to do that data migration, if you take the time to think of through a more thoughtful data management strategy, you're going to ultimately have that time savings on the people side whenever it comes to actually use those technologies and actually start accessing the data in the cloud.
Definitely. So there's a lot of cloud options out there. So with more than one cloud environment to choose from, do either of you have a personal favorite or one that you think is maybe a good starting point for people to start looking into?
I'm not sure I would say I have a favorite. FINRA does use a couple of different clouds, as I think most big companies do. We are focused on a data lake architecture, meaning that all of our data is centralized as it happens in AWS. And because we are very data centric, that means the vast majority of our processing occurs in AWS as well. It is important, and we do have an internal policy that we try very hard not to use vendor provided or vendor specific solutions to problems, because that would sort of tie us into their ecosystem, and then it becomes more difficult if we needed to use a multi-cloud solution or an alternate cloud to migrate to that. So we do make it a point of using open source technologies that we can move from cloud to cloud, from environment to environment. But again, because we are focused on the data lake solution, it does mean that most of our processing ends up in a single cloud. Now, that being said, like I said, we do use other cloud providers as well, but they're used for different aspects of our business. It might be for finance, it might be for HR, it might be for other systems that are not exactly core to our sort of data focused mission.
Michelle, how about you?
I was hoping I could get out of this one. I can't say that I have a favorite per se. I have by far the most experience with AWS, and I think that it is a great choice for anybody who is looking for a cloud offering. I've also heard really great things about Azure. I've known several people who have had very successful migrations to the Azure cloud, but I've not worked with it personally. And then I don't have much visibility into any of the other vendors out there. But I agree with what Ivan was saying around, being thoughtful around having a multi-cloud strategy and trying to avoid vendor lock-in if you can. Unfortunately, I think some of the technologies out there today and some of the ways that they go about it really make it challenging for us to do that. And so I'm hopeful that that will change in the future.
How about impact on overall governance strategy within an organization that cloud migration has? Have either of you kind of taken a step back in your positions and been able to see what that looks like on a broader spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I'll dovetail on what Michelle said earlier about sort of the data management piece, right? She's absolutely right that one of the key challenges to moving into a cloud, and in our case, moving to a data lake architecture, is ensuring that you have visibility all the way out to your end users in terms of what data you have, where that data resides, how they can get access to that data, the business definitions of that data, all of the sort of metadata around your core business data. And for us, at the time that we migrated about 6 years ago, we didn't see a product out there that could sort of solve that metadata need for us. So we wrote our own and later outsourced it, open sourced it as something called Herd. But that's really core to what we would consider our data lake architecture into our cloud strategy. Without that sort of service, without a service that all of our not just automated programs interact with, but our human beings interact with, if our analysts want to see data about a particular topic, let's say it's some sort of trade data, they go to our metadata repository and query it and say, hey, I want to see the latest trade data, or I want to see trade data from this date, or I want to see the business definition of this field for this particular table of our trade data. Mm-hmm. All of that's contained in our metadata repository. And that really allows them to focus on solving the problems that they have or answering the questions that they have with the data, rather than working through, how do I get access to this table? Is it the latest version? Did we get a correction on this data 2 weeks ago that I didn't hear about? That sort of metadata management is really core for us in terms of our cloud strategy.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think the cloud migration project offers a great opportunity for you to get in front of some of your governance challenges. So oftentimes you'll find that there's, as Ivan was just mentioning, there's multiple copies of the same table, right? And these will often happen organically, either in terms of like silos by technology or silos by departments, right? And so now you've got multiple copies of the same tables that are living in different places that might have different quality issues with them, right? And there's not a lot of really good visibility here. And so when you do move to the cloud, it presents an opportunity for you to eliminate some of those silos to create a greater centralized view. But then again, as Ivan mentioned, we had the same type of challenges around metadata management. So we also had to create a federated data catalog called Metacat, which I think Netflix is open sourced as well, to really allow us to do a lot of the governance types of tasks that we needed to be able to understand, where does the data reside? What is the quality of the data? What is the SLA of this data? And so it was really that piece in conjunction with like the cloud migration strategy that allowed us to get further ahead in terms of our governance.
So both of you kind of starting this cloud migration journey early on, relatively in the terms of when this became a popular trend. Michelle, I know you've been working with data long before data was popular, but when this journey started, it was purely almost a cost efficiency benefit when it came to cloud. But the cloud is really moving into a new era of benefits, and companies are starting to think more comprehensively about what benefits the cloud offers. So, what do you both see beyond cost as primary benefits, and how do you communicate those to your organizations?
I think agility is a big part of it. As Ivan mentioned, you can more easily experiment with new technologies. You can spin up new clusters. We actually had a data pre-processing task that we needed to go restate and remove some data that some private C data had gotten into our systems that we had not planned. And so once we discovered it, we needed to go remove it. And so to do that typically would have just been an enormous undertaking. And what we were able to do instead is spin up a completely brand new cluster and have that running. And as soon as that was done, tear it down. And it became just a transparent process that really did not affect users and did not really affect our primary production environment at all. And had we been on-prem, that would have just not been possible at all. And so you've got that kind of, I would say, like the agility there, the overall flexibility of the environment. It's very powerful.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about that. I think there's a couple of advantages, one more exciting than the other to talk about. One is in terms of operational resiliency. By moving into the cloud, we've really seen benefits over and above what we were able to achieve in our own in-house data centers. Something as simple as a particular platform's having an issue, your operational folks get on and start looking at it. In the old days, we would have to stay on that, keep working on it, debugging it, trying to find the root cause while our users were impacted. Now in the cloud environment, if it takes our operational folks more than 5 or 10 minutes to figure out what the problem is, they stand up an entirely new environment in an automated fashion. The users are cut over, and now the users are up and running within 10 minutes, while our operational staff doesn't need to feel that pressure of users waiting for them to really dig in and identify the root cause of whatever the problem might have been. So we're really seeing improved resiliency in our operations. Secondly, we're really able to empower our end users further than we used to be able to. Again, on sort of the on-prem environment, our users were, I'll just say, stuck with whatever the hardware was that we had, right? If they were doing analysis of a particular data scientist was trying to analyze data and it took 30 minutes for it to run, that's how long it took. But in the cloud, this same data scientist can go and provision their own hardware of the appropriate size with the appropriate configuration, such that they can actually improve the runtime. They can go from 30 minutes to 10 minutes, whatever it might be, based on the urgency of their need. And their use of that equipment can be segregated from other analysts doing similar work, which means that somebody who's busy in one department doesn't necessarily impact somebody in another department. So we really are able to empower our end users, both in terms of the hardware that they're able to provision, but also in terms of the tools that we're able to give them access to. Again, because it's all automated, it's all easy for them to just say, hey, give me this, this will solve my problem. We really have seen significant improvement as a result.
Great. Well, this was great, guys. I think we got a lot of valuable information out of it. Just one last question. Any sort of final tips or tricks or things you might, have in your pocket to offer people as a last minute piece of advice?
Sure. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. The first one is really around architecture and making sure that, again, you have that comprehensive view. And towards that, I guess one tip would be try crowdsourcing that. Try reaching out to all of the technical people in your company and share out this diagram and see if you can create something that is filling in any of the missing gaps. Because what we found is that in a very large, complex, organically grown technical environment, there's no one person who has it all, and none of the diagrams are accurate and up to date. And so by doing that, it might not be completely accurate, but you're going to find a lot of things that you might not have known of. About. And then the second thing is really to put your cost monitoring in place in advance of the migration, right? And start monitoring that. And really all of your monitoring, put that in place in advance, because the cost mechanics of the cloud are very different than your legacy on-prem infrastructure.
I should have gone first. Michelle took both the things I wanted to bring up, but that's okay. I'll just dovetail with her. Yeah, from an architecture perspective, one of the things I'd recommend is really trying to focus on core principles of your architecture and allowing those core principles to then just to drive the decisions that you make. Because to Michelle's point, it's impossible to keep the diagrams up to date. You can never get all the right people involved in every key decision. But if you bring in stakeholders again from throughout your organization to talk about the core principles that you're trying to achieve and that you want to drive towards with your designs, those core principles can then influence all of the actual decisions that end up being made. And that really sort of multiplies the effect of having a few good architects in your environment, right? They don't need to be in every meeting, but they help define, we'll call them the waypoints out in the horizon that you're shooting for. And then also on the cost front, what we found is that, and this is something that may seem counterintuitive at first, but when we first got into the cloud, it was far more expensive than doing things in-house. And that was because we didn't have the sort of visibility that Michelle was talking about in terms of who was spinning up what and why and what was it for and how long was it running and how was it managed and everything else. And we very quickly realized that we needed to spin up an entire practice around monitoring the environment, understanding what everything's being used for. Does this need to be up 24/7? Can this be brought down at the end of the day? And again, that drives you towards sort of that automation mindset where everything needs to be automated all the way down to the end users, right? My end users shouldn't have to do anything manually to bring their environments to bear. I want them to walk into the office just like they log into their laptops in the morning. I want them to log into the environment in the morning and what they need is there. But if you really focus on that, you can drive your costs down tremendously in the cloud from that first initial sort of sticker shock that you might get. But eventually it becomes much more cost effective and allows you to scale up as you're going.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. This was a really great kind of productive conversation and a good starting point for, I think, a lot of people that are going to be going through this cloud journey in the next couple of months or years here. So thanks again. And I think we'll jump into the poll now. And it was great talking with you both.
Thanks so much, Marissa.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much to Michelle and Ivan for taking the time to do this. I really enjoyed our discussion this morning, and I hope our audience was able to take away some useful tips for everybody. Also want to thank our audience who participated in this poll. It's super helpful for us to hear from you all and gives us a better understanding of the market when we can get your guys' feedback. So I'm going to go over those results quickly before we wrap up. So for the first poll question, which cloud are you moving to? We got 25% of you are moving to AWS, 50% to Azure, 0% to GCP, 4.2% to IBM, and 20.8% to others. And then for the second poll question, what's the main reason for moving to the cloud? 27.3% were for agility reasons, 4.5% for cost, 31.8% for modernization, 36.4% for scalability, and 0% for security. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. Super fun discussion. And again, hope you all were able to take something away from this in your cloud journeys.